That box of old comics sitting in your parents' garage, the one nobody's opened since you were a kid. One of the books inside might be worth more than your car. 10 issues just like it have sold for real money. One sold for over $250,000. Nobody in that house knew it either, not until someone finally checked the corner of the cover. Here's the part nobody tells you about comic books. It's not the story that decides the price. Every kid who bought these off a spinner rack read the exact same story, expensive copy or not, so the story alone tells you nothing. It's not the character either, even though everybody assumes a famous character means a valuable book. It's not even the condition by itself, though condition matters more than almost anything else in this hobby. Here's what really decides it. A handful of small details printed the day these books left the press that most people never once stopped to check. A barcode, a logo, a single misspelled word. That's the entire difference between a stack of nostalgia and a small fortune, and most of these details sat in plain sight for over 40 years without anyone bothering to look closely. Comic shops, estate sales and dollar bins have handed these exact books away for pocket change more times than anyone can count. We're going to check 10 comics from that era before we're done here. Let's find out what's sitting in your garage. Number 10. A comic starring characters from Batman's animated show, picked up because a kid liked the cartoon, gets tossed in a long box and forgotten the moment the show went off the air. That's a completely reasonable reaction, honestly. Comics tied to cartoons got treated as disposable merchandise by nearly everyone who bought them in the 90s. Batman Adventures number 12 splits off from that pile for one specific reason. This is the real first print appearance of Harley Quinn in a comic book created for the animated series and put on paper here for the first time. A newsstand copy in top condition, graded a perfect 9.8, sold for $5,280. The same comic sold through a comic shop instead, same grade, brings closer to $3,250. Check the corner first. A barcode box means newsstand. A DC logo in that same corner means direct edition. That one small printing difference is worth almost $2,000 on its own. Plenty of dealers priced these at $1 or $2 well into the 2000s before anyone realized what that first print status was worth. Number 9. A Spider-Man comic with a strange black costume on the cover gets shelved next to 50 other Spider-Man issues without a second thought. Because Spider-Man comics from the 80s are everywhere, that instinct isn't wrong. Most of them aren't worth much. Amazing Spider-Man number 300 is the exception, because this is the full origin of Venom, and it's also Todd McFarlane's first issue ever drawing the character. A copy graded a perfect 9.8 sold for $5,300. Get McFarlane himself to sign that same grade, and one has sold for over $31,000. Check the corner first. Newsstand barcode against a Spider-Man head logo, same test as before, and newsstand wins again. This book is common enough that around 30,000 copies have already been sent in for grading, so condition is doing almost all the work on the price. Boxes of these sat in basements for 2 decades before anyone realized which printing they were even holding. Number 8. Spawn number 1 gets waved off by most people before they even open the cover because tens of millions of copies got printed and hoarded the same month it hit shelves. That reputation is mostly earned. A normal copy in great condition brings around $70 today, barely worth the gas to sell it. But a small number of copies rolled off the press with a manufacturing mistake, a thin, patchy black ink strike on the back cover instead of a clean, glossy black. One of those error copies, graded a perfect 9.8, sold for $8,400. Flip yours over before you decide it's worthless. If the black ink on the back cover looks weak, streaky, or missing in patches compared to a normal glossy black cover, you might be holding the version worth over 100 times more. Most people who owned this book in the 90s threw the extras away without a second thought, since millions of identical-looking copies made it feel worthless from day one. Number 7. An old Daredevil issue from 1981 gets skipped past on a shelf because the cover doesn't look dramatic, just a woman in red standing next to Daredevil. Skip too fast, and you'll miss the real story here. This is the first appearance of Elektra, and it's also the first issue Frank Miller ever wrote for the character. A low-grade copy, well-read and worn, sold for $144. A newsstand copy graded a perfect 9.8 is reported to have sold for somewhere around $13,900, though that exact figure comes from price trackers rather than a receipt I could pull myself. So treat it as a strong estimate, not gospel. Check the corner first, same barcode test as always, and check the cover text too. It misspells her name, printed right there on the cover as Elektra instead of Elektra. That misspelling is on the genuine first printing. It's not a sign your copy is fake. This entire issue used to get passed over at conventions in favor of flashier covers on the same table, right next to it, for a fraction of the price. Number 6. A New Mutants comic from the early 90s, buried under dozens of other X-Men spin-offs, gets treated as filler because most people don't even remember this specific team book existed. Here's why that's a mistake worth correcting fast. This single issue is the first appearance of Deadpool, a character who went on to headline his own movies. A copy graded a flawless 9.9 sold for $24,000, dropped down to a well-worn 4.0. And the exact same comic brings around $180. Check the corner first. Barcode means newsstand, a Spider-Man head logo means direct edition, and newsstand pulls ahead again here. $24,000 for a comic that cost $1.50 new is the kind of gap that should make anyone check their old long boxes twice. One collector traded a near-mint copy of this exact issue for 2 unrelated comics back in the mid-90s, a trade he still brings up decades later. Number 5. Another amazing Spider-Man issue from the 70s, cover worn soft at the corners, gets treated as one more common back issue not worth sorting through. Most Spider-Man comics from this decade genuinely aren't worth much, so that assumption holds most of the time. It just doesn't hold here. Amazing Spider-Man number 129 is the first appearance of both the Punisher and the Jackal. A copy graded a perfect 9.8 sold for $43,200. Back in 2005, a mid-grade copy of this exact same issue sold for only $92, showing how far this specific book has climbed in 20 years, while thousands of comics from the same era went nowhere. Check the corner first. No barcode at all on a genuine copy, since this predates barcodes on comics completely, and double-check the title printed on the cover. Reprints of this exact story exist under completely different comic titles. A jump from $92 to over $40,000 in 20 years is a bigger swing than almost anything else on this entire list. Number 4. An old Batman comic from 1967. Cover a little faded, spine a little rolled, gets tucked back into a box without much thought, because Batman comics from this era turn up constantly at estate sales. Look closer at the top of this particular cover before you tuck it away again. Detective Comics number 359 carries the black and white checkerboard strip DC ran across the top of every cover for about 18 months. And this specific issue happens to be the origin and first appearance of Batgirl. A pristine copy graded 9.8 sold for $132,000, the highest price ever paid for a Batman family comic from that entire era. A well-worn copy, graded 4.5, sold for $463.60. That's roughly a 280 times difference between the two, and it's the exact same comic book. Copies of this issue passed through estate sales for years, priced next to worthless funny pages, sold in stacks rather than one at a time. Number 3. A worn Incredible Hulk comic from 1974 cover corners soft, staples a little rusted, ends up donated in a box of random paperbacks without anyone glancing past the cover. That's an expensive mistake to make. Incredible Hulk number 181 is the first full appearance of Wolverine, arguably the single most requested key issue in the entire hobby. A copy graded a perfect 9.8 sold for $138,000. A more recent, slightly lower grade copy still brought $8,540 just this year. Even a heavily read copy, barely holding together, is worth over $1,000. Check the corner of the cover for the Marvel value stamp box before you decide anything. If that stamp got cut out with scissors decades ago, which happened constantly, the comic still holds real value, just roughly a third less than a copy with the stamp box left intact. A family clearing out a relative's collection at an estate sale in the early 2000s priced this exact issue at $2, with no idea what was sitting in that box. Number 2. A black and white comic from 1984 featuring 4 turtles. Nobody outside a small circle of collectors had heard of, yet gets mistaken for some kind of cheap knockoff or fan project. It's the opposite of a knockoff. This is the real first printing of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 1, self-published by 2 guys working out of a garage in Massachusetts, with only around 3,000 copies of this true first printing ever made. A copy graded 9.8 sold for $250,000. Even a rough, well-read copy still brings somewhere between $2,700 and $4,500 today, because that print run was so small to begin with. Check the inside front cover, just below the thank you note to Quentin Eastman. A genuine first printing has no printing notice there at all. Second and third printings say so directly, right on that page. Copies of this book sat in comic shops for $1 each throughout the 80s, since nobody involved had any idea a small, self-published black and white comic would end up here. Number 1. And this is the one piece on the entire list that predates a detail everybody assumes every old comic has. A 1972 comic featuring a flaming skull rider on a motorcycle gets dismissed by people who assume it's some cheap 70s knockoff character, since nobody expects a mainstream comic company to have published something this strange this early. Marvel Spotlight number 5 is the real origin and first appearance of Ghost Rider, and it predates barcodes on comic books completely, meaning a genuine copy has no barcode box anywhere on the cover at all. A copy graded a perfect 9.8 sold for $264,000, at the time the highest price ever paid for a comic book from this entire era of Marvel's history. A well-read copy, graded a 6, still sold for over $1,000, and that top price keeps climbing. The same auction house currently lists a 9.8 from this issue with an asking floor of $366,000 or more. 5 years ago, the record for this exact grade sat under $50,000. It has more than quintupled since, and nobody knows where the ceiling stops. 10 comics. Every single price on this list traced back to the same handful of small printing details most people never once checked before closing the box and shoving it under a bed. Not the character everybody already knows. Not how many people have heard of the story. A barcode instead of a logo. A misprint nobody thought to look for. A checkerboard strip across the top of a cover people flip past in 2 seconds. If you've got a box of old comics somewhere, even a small one, it's worth 10 minutes to go through it and check the corners instead of guessing. You don't need to know grading or condition standards to start. You just need to know where to look. And if something in that box matches one of these 10, get a second opinion from a real grading service before you do anything else with it, because a guess isn't the same as an answer. People have donated boxes like this to thrift stores for years without a second thought, and other people walked out with them for $1 apiece. That's 10 books, 10 completely different reasons, and every one of them came down to a detail that was sitting there in plain sight the entire time, waiting for someone to finally check.